God says that, based on Mount Sinai, he says that you saw no form of the likeness of a man, of a woman,
Hmm.
of an animal, anything in the sky or the sea below.
Like,
You only heard the voice.
yep.
So you experienced God, whatever that was specifically like at the time, but you saw nothing. When you look at the beginning of the giving of the Ten Commandments, he says it again. It's specific that he has no form.
And it literally
Yeah.
says, so that you don't corrupt yourselves and make yourselves
Yeah.
an image of these things under heaven. The male or
Yeah.
female is talking about men, talking about humans. Yeah. Welcome to Tanach Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Testimonial Tuesdays. That's why I said TNT or TT. Testimonial Tuesdays with a new friend, Jeremy McMillan. Welcome, Jeremy. It's a pleasure having you on. I can't wait to hear your story, and neither can anybody else.
Well, I totally appreciate you having me on. I'm pretty excited about it.
Great, great. Tell us a bit about where you're from. What part of the U.S. are you around?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Mansfield, Ohio. But in 2001, I left there, became a Southern transplant. So I'm in Jacksonville, North Carolina. The Marine Corps brought me down here years ago, and I just kind of ended up making this home, and here I am.
Very cool. Well, the traditional thing to say is thank you for your service, and we should all be thankful for that. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, very good. So, okay, so let's just I'm gonna go all the way back before. Let's go back before you were born. How's that?
Yeah,
You want to take me there for a minute?
I know all about it. I know all
This
about it.
you were almost there. Okay, tell me a little bit about your family heritage.
Yeah, so pretty interesting. Kind of an interesting mix. My mother's side is Catholic. My dad's side's Protestant. But the kicker to all of this is my mother's side. Her father, his bloodline's Jewish.
Interesting.
So yeah, so we don't necessarily. So we know that like somewhere his grandfather's grandfather, somewhere in there, and I don't want to give an exact time throughout the generations exactly where it was because I don't know personally 100%. But he was a Jewish rabbi either in Germany or Poland during World War II, fleeing Hitler. Um,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, so my bloodline was broken. We don't really necessarily know all of it. My grandfather, when I was a kid, so my mother's father, used to talk about like Jewish stuff and things, and I always thought he was joking because nobody else in the family talked about it really. So
Kind of a
um,
taboo concept if you think about it a little bit.
yeah,
The whole Jewish
kind
thing.
of kind of interesting. So,
Yeah.
but predominantly my mother's side was Catholic. My father's side was Protestant, and so
So
it was kind of an interesting mix.
were they active or were they kind of more like passive Christians?
So, the household that I grew up in ultimately was active. My mother was a very active Protestant, which she became Protestant because of my father's father. Um, but on her side, they were also very active Catholic. But
Gotcha.
I don't know where my mother ended up. I guess going more toward the Protestant side. I think maybe because of my grandfather, my dad's dad probably enlightened her on those things, I guess, is probably my guess is what happened.
Sure. Did you have any aunts or uncles that are like other family members that were in the church?
So on my dad's side, I had family members that were very active in the church. I had on my mother's side, they were pretty active as far as like aunts and things of that nature, aunts and uncles. They were, I can remember like one aunt specifically that was active in the Catholic Church. That's about it.
Okay. Kind of curious because I know with a lot of Spanish families, you ask them and they say, well, we're Catholic, of course, but they've never been to church a day in their life. They're Catholic
Yeah.
because their ancestors are Catholic. So, participating in the church and actually being active members they raise their kids differently. So, so with you, as a young child, did your parents take you to church? Were you in church all the time then, or how did that work out?
Yeah, so growing up, we were very active in the church. My mother taught my brother and I the Bible all of the. I almost said religiously, right? But so all of the.
Nice.
Starting to use some of these catchphrases here.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't. So, but we were taught the Bible a lot. What I found was interesting about my childhood. My mother predominantly taught us out of, and I hate using this term, but the Old Testament, but we'll just the Hebrew
Yeah.
Scriptures, right?
Yes.
So my mother predominantly taught us out of the Hebrew Scriptures. We didn't know I guess, really any better. I guess we were in the Christian concepts of things in general. We believed in all of that. But it was interesting growing up. My mom really taught us out of the Hebrew scriptures, not as much out of the Christian scriptures. I didn't really
Interesting. Nice.
feel like I learned a lot about that until later in life.
Cool. So I'm guessing you lived a normal childhood up till you about 18, then you moved out, or did you stay at home? And how did that lead you, the spiritual side of your life? How did that direct your future before you left home? Like maybe right up to the edge where you have left home now and you're moving on your own. How was your spiritual life then?
So look, I'm just gonna throw. I had the best. I grew up in the '80s and '90s. I had the best childhood ever. BMX bikes.
Oh,
I lived
nice.
out in the middle of nowhere. We and just always making forts and all of those playing in the woods, all kinds of fun things like that. Spiritually, um, I mean, I always knew God existed, but I don't necessarily know that I put a ton of thought into it growing up. Even though I was taught it, my whole life, it was very much ingrained in me and my brother. But
How old is
I
your
guess it was,
brother?
I'm sorry,
Is your brother older or younger than you?
he's 3 years younger. So I'm 43, he's
Okay,
40.
gotcha. Okay, good.
Yes. And so basically, um, I, I guess it was just something that was always ingrained in me. And I think probably because of that fact, I probably took a lot of it for granted and never really followed it. In July of 2001, I went to boot camp for the Marine Corps, and all of the sudden, I really became very religious.
Hmm.
All of the sudden, in the Marine Corps, I became very religious.
Oh yeah.
And so that wavered a lot, throughout my time. And I did 8 years active. Then I worked for the Marine Corps and the government stuff for another 12 or 13 years after that. But, um, I was very up and down. But I always like if somebody were to question whether God existed, like we'll have that discussion.
Sure.
Do I think that my life really was showing that during those years? I definitely don't believe so. Um, so spiritually, it's like I knew God existed, but I was kind of living life, and I was not exactly what I would call like observant of any kind, but I knew God existed, and I knew what I was taught.
Gotcha.
Whether I lived it out or not. In conversation, we had that conversation. We talk about it, but I think I had some pretty rough deployments, and I believe that they say like there's no atheist in a foxhole. You ever heard that saying?
Right. Right.
That is 100%. That's 100% real. Before a lot of big offensive operations, you would get like your like last strikes and things like that, and everyone was always there for those type of things because everybody knew well what could potentially happen, and so everybody was very oriented toward God at that point in time, and you really put a lot more thought into it. And I honestly believe that every human being knows God exists. And I
Yeah.
think when you get closer to facing things like death,
Yeah. Fear is a major motivator.
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I guess it was after you left the military when you really finally took a turn and was said, you know what, I think I'm going to get serious about God. What point in your life did that take place?
Well, my military service, I've had a pretty rough time, in some things, and I have carried that for a really long time. And um, so I became, I just lived, I think pretty much, I lived life on fire. I was a severe alcoholic. I mean, I was probably in and out of the hospital. I was, uh, pretty much always looking for adrenaline, like an adrenaline rush. I I was just, I lived a life on fire for many years, until it pretty much took me to death.
Mm.
And I really didn't have anything. And I remember being just really bad off I think it was one morning. I used to have to just stand at my kitchen sink for just hours, and I just wouldn't be able to do anything else, just stand at my kitchen sink. And I remember just being like, in this house by myself, like I'd pretty much lost everything at that point. I pretty much remember being like, I don't want to go to hell. And that was kind of like the start. Um, and I ended up, going back home to Ohio to visit and went into this church and, that whole ordeal, right? Preacher calls you up and you
Hmm.
say the prayer or whatever. But that was kind of my beginning of the relationship that I started to form with God. That was the beginning. That
How
was like, in my opinion, was the real beginning.
how long ago was that?
That was in 2006, 15 or 16.
Okay, it's about 10 years.
Hmm.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, so after at that point in time, you're finally really going to start investing into Christianity, not financially, but I mean emotionally and with your thoughts and with your heart. How did that journey go, and what did at some point in time you got into teaching, I believe, right?
Yeah. So, like I had whatever I don't know what you want to call, like, I'm still trying to figure out what the whole born again experience, what that is, right? I feel like I had that moment. I mean, I have a lot to say about it. I don't know if there's necessarily enough time here, but
Maybe.
I did, I did have that moment, where God took a hold of me. And I do feel that God had a hold of me, through there's no way I should be sitting here talking to you right now. Like if if I were to just like start to say some of the things that I've been through
Hmm.
and some of the things that I've seen and some of the things that I've experienced, like I think that anybody could clearly say like there's no reason for me to be like I'm an anomaly.
Right.
I'm an anomaly, it's because God's hand has been on me and there's
Hmm.
been a purpose specifically. I believe every human being has a purpose and so I'm not like somehow special for any reason, but my purpose hasn't come to fruition yet completely. But I feel like, God has always had his hand on me. He's been moving me in a direction.
With all the traumatic things that you've been through with war and even the near-death experiences, stuff like this, whenever you had that God awareness, was it because you were already kind of raised with a Christian mindset during that time? Did you kind of associate God and Jesus as the same, like thank you Jesus for saving me, or was it always just straight? I mean, because that's how it was for me. I was very aware of God, but it was always I was taught it was Jesus, so we would just say thank
Yeah.
you Jesus, and now it's thank you Moses. So that's
Yes,
true.
that's actually good, man. So, because of my upbringing, I did associate a man with God.
Mhm.
I didn't know any better. Yeah, I did associate God with being, Jesus, and I like it disgusts me to think that now,
Mhm.
just because of how big of a deal idolatry is and how big of a deal it is to not, you know, I for every little small thing that we have in life, we should be recognizing God for every small breath, every little thing. But we take so much for granted in this country.
Mhm.
And I don't want to actually get it wrong and say that God's something that he says he's not something. I'm not would never continue to fight that. I used to fight it. I used to say, oh, he is a man and all these other things. But so I did believe that he was a man at that time, and I felt like I had to pray through
Mhm.
the man, that Jesus at that time, and
Sure.
I know that that's all wrong. God says that when they were at the base of Mount Sinai, he says that you saw no form of the likeness of a man, of a woman,
Mhm.
of an animal, anything in the sky or the sea below.
Like,
You only heard the voice.
yep.
So you experienced God, whatever that was specifically like at the time, but you saw nothing. When you look at the beginning of the giving of the Ten Commandments, he says it again. It's specific that he has no form.
And it literally
Yeah.
says, so that you don't corrupt yourselves and make yourselves
Yeah.
an image of these things under heaven. The male or
Yeah.
female is talking about men, talking about humans. Yeah, it's so wild.
So it's just, and when you start to look at other passages that say things like, in Deuteronomy 13, where it says that you will not serve the gods that you didn't know.
Hmm.
Like your ancestors should not serve gods that you did not know. So I've asked, okay, where is this God that I used to believe in? They must have believed in him too. If I'm supposed to believe in him, and this is the rules. So there's rules that say you don't believe in a God that they didn't know.
When did you start questioning these things you're telling me now? Was it like 10 years ago, or was it just like in the past year or two?
So I went to when I was in Christianity, ended up being very strong in the church. I got into ministry. I went to Bible college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I had my own ministry. I was a little bit different though. Look, I was part of a ministry that had a brick and mortar, but I didn't really, I mean, I did preach in brick and mortar, but I was in the streets. I would go everywhere. I would go to the worst places,
Nice.
and nobody could touch me. I always knew that I could go anywhere and preach and nobody could ever put their hand on me. I always saw that. Like I would preach, and then when I was leaving, it's as if things were going to get bad. But it was never when I was there. Nobody ever was able to put their hands on me. I had like the police that would threaten me. I had all kinds of things, but I was never nobody ever put their hands on me. Um, So my ministry was a little bit different than most people's. I was actively in the streets. I didn't really, I mean, my pulpit was wherever I wanted it to be, wherever I felt like God sent me. But I will, this is what I strongly believe about that whole situation. Just like my own experience when I went into a church and said I didn't want to go to hell, and like I didn't want to be an alcoholic anymore, and I didn't want to like face death, and I didn't want to live a life that I was consistently living at that time. That was the beginning of me. Well, that was really the beginning of God showing me who He really is. So I believe that the church is corrupt as it is, as corrupt as the theology is, all of those things as bad as it has a purpose. God's bigger than that. God still speaks to them. You have the capacity to listen, though, is the problem. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of
right.
Christians don't listen. I think Christians are hearing a lot of the things that come from like shows that inform them, like yours and some others. And there are those that don't listen, but there are those that are like Abraham that are willing to be called out of idolatry and called out of the land and be taken to a land that, that they haven't seen yet. And
Hmm.
I believe strongly that God works through those means to bring people out if you want to come out. Not
So
everybody wants to.
how did you find out? I mean, was it just out of your own studies you were thinking, man, that doesn't make sense? Or did something trigger it? Like, did you see a video or see a conversation? What triggered your search to go deeper to find the errors of Christianity?
So it started out with the concept of the Sabbath, the seventh day Sabbath. I questioned why the New Testament started making these claims that, well, I would say this: the church, there are sects of the church that make the claim that the Christian scriptures say that the seventh day Sabbath has been done away with. There are other sects of Christianity that say it has not been done away with. I believe that a lot of that stuff is very subjective, and that's how you have over 44,000 different denominations because people subjectively look at those. What's not subjective is places like Exodus 20 or Exodus 31, specifically speaking of the Sabbath. So the Sabbath to me and reading about it through the Hebrew scriptures is what ultimately started to draw my attention to the possibility, to the potential that I'm in the wrong place. Not that Christianity was wrong at the time, I didn't know that, but maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe
Hmm.
I'm living Christianity in the wrong way. I started to, when you look at um, why is it that like you go into these churches and they have the Ten Commandments on the wall, but yet they don't follow them? They follow them in a manner that suits their lives, and then
Hmm.
they tell you that like all of this stuff's been done away with. Well, if it's been done away with, then why do you have the Ten Commandments in there anyhow? Because they
Yeah.
don't belong. It just doesn't make a ton of sense. But the fourth commandment specifically, when it's talking about keeping the Sabbath, but we don't do it. But then there's the Lord's Day, there's Sunday. So that means that if the seventh day no longer is on the seventh day and now it's on the next day, it's on
Hmm.
Sunday, then why is it that places like Exodus 31 say that this is a perpetual covenant through all of your generations? It's between the God of creation and the sons of Israel. It's eternal, right? If there are still generations of Jewish people, then how could it be that the Sabbath no longer is to be kept? How
Hmm.
how, how could it be that it's no longer valid? It's in my opinion, all of these things are based off of evidence of the text. The text provides us the marker to which we should observe.
Hmm.
And it's if there are still Jewish people observing it, there are still Jewish people being observed, then what God is saying is that needs to still be observed. Like it has not gone away. Leviticus 26, God says that you might be spread out to all the nations and all of these things, and you're going to forget about me. But there's a point where, you'll return. But Hashem said, like, I will never forget you and I will never annul this covenant. Deuteronomy 4 says like something very similar to it, that no matter what, when you're spread out to all these nations, God is not going to forget his
Hmm.
covenant.
Right. Yeah.
Jeremiah 31 starts talking about talking about a lot of the same things there too.
Tells you who the covenant is going to be with. Israel and Judah,
Yeah.
not Christians or Hindus or Buddhists, but Israel and Judah. You know, it's wild about the Sabbath day. That was the thing that triggered that was the very first thing that triggered me too. And later I come to find out that God in His wisdom even created a failsafe, something just to make sure that His Jewish people would never make that mistake, because the days of the week are numbered. They don't have names. Saturday is Shabbat's the only day of the week that's got a name. That's Shabbat, and it's actually the root word of the number seven. And it's always been that way. So Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, these are numbers. They're not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They're not these weird names. So, and when I found that out, I was like, man, oh my gosh, how could the church not know to resource the Hebrew to find out what the original word said. It'll tell you, wrong day. So that's crazy, man. Okay, so
Well,
go ahead.
I, if I could, that there's something that, and I use the term God of creation a lot
I
because
like
I
that.
think
I
it's
like
very
that.
important.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I like that actually.
That was something that came to me, I felt like very early. Um, it's just always been on my mind, like the God of creation. And I think the reason that that matters is because when you look at the concept of the Sabbath observance, it's the Christians, I know it's not the case in all Christianity, but most Christians don't follow it. Islam doesn't follow it. There's a reason why, in my opinion, that the sons of Israel are, following the seventh day Sabbath as God did, where he rested on the seventh day. He created in 6 days and he rested on the seventh day. And it's specifically that in itself, it's a witness to the God that you serve.
Hmm.
That's what it is. It's a specific physical milestone. It's a physical marker in time that this is the God that we serve. We're saying that the God that created all things, who has the ability to provide and does provide for all of his creation, is the one that said that we are to continue to keep these things through all of our generations. It is an eternal covenant, the seventh day. Matter of fact, you can, like, for not keeping it, you can be cut off. And if I
Yep.
if I
Yep.
understand correctly, I'm not a theologian, but I believe that there are, like, I was just talking to a rabbi recently. There's roughly like 36, I believe, negative commandments where you can, like, your soul can be cut off from, and so that being one of them,
Mm.
I think that that's something that has a lot of importance.
Yeah.
You know,
Agreed.
it
Agreed.
holds a lot of weight.
Sure. Sure. So, okay, so you got to that point about the Sabbath day, and did that just make you think, "Wow, I can't go to church anymore because they do it on Sunday"? Did you still keep your Christian mindset and say, "Well, I'm going to start doing my thing on Saturday then," or how did that work? Well, you said that you had your own ministry, so you can kind of do whatever you wanted to. Did you
So
just
I was
change to Saturday?
Yes, so I was actually part of a brick and mortar ministry, but I was more of the evangelist side of that
Mm-hmm.
ministry. Um, so I started asking, general questions to people that had been around Christianity for a lot longer than me as far as observance and study. And the answers that I was receiving, I was not satisfied with. So I continued to dig into this whole situation. It's really interesting because during that time it was kind of very uncomfortable because you're like a solo artist, like you're on your own now, like
Mm-hmm.
you're asking all these questions, like I mean, I wasn't purposely, at that time I didn't recognize I was doing it, but I was going against the church,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the way they started to treat me, and it was very uncomfortable. And it's interesting how God does things because I had sold my house, and I was married at the time. We ended up, for a short amount of time, we were ended up living with some people in the church. We were going to buy land and get a house and things, so we were living with people in the church for a short amount of time, and that's when all of this stuff started to unfold. And this idea that now I'm questioning the church, it's getting uncomfortable in this house because now I feel, I'm not saying that Christianity as a whole is wrong at that time, but I'm saying we should be keeping the Sabbath. So now I'm actively attempting, with just the general, very little knowledge that I had, trying to keep the Sabbath in this home with people that don't believe they should be keeping the Sabbath.
Wow. Wow.
And things were getting, interesting. And I think it was just uncomfortable, probably for us. It was uncomfortable for them completely. I was a leader of the church at the time, so they're like, well, you know, this isn't good because you have one leader that's doing one thing and a leader that's doing something completely different, and so now the church must be at odds. It was uncomfortable for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So it really started to get to the point where, um, my brother started saying some things because he's very well studied, and he was the one that actually came up with the idea that Jesus was not the Jewish Messiah before I ever did.
Wow.
And when yeah, he started telling me all these things, and I said, "You're nuts! Like, you're crazy, man! You're crazy." So he started sharing with me videos from Rabbi Michael Skobac, and Rabbi Tovia Singer, and I started watching these videos. And at the time, I was training for, like, this big hike in the mountains, and so while I was out doing my training, I would watch these videos. And I'm telling you, the moment that I would get done, someone from the church would text me something that I just
Just
learned.
heard
I
the
mean, this
answer
was
to.
like I just learned this stuff like from
Yes,
the
yes,
video,
that's awesome.
and so I'm regurgitating this stuff through text message, and I don't know what I'm talking about. I honestly recognize at that point that I am actually ignorant. I think that I know all of these things. I really don't know, and I started to feel like, oh my gosh, I
Mm,
have to start over. Like I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to turn. I'm just gonna keep watching these videos, and it was like clockwork. Every
mm.
day I would watch a video. I'd end up watching them twice, sometimes listening to them while I'm training, and somebody would text me from the church and they would ask me a question, and it was exactly about what I just watched. And it was like clockwork, and you could just see God working.
That is amazing.
And yeah,
So from the time you questioned the Sabbath day till the time you said that's it, I'm done. How big of a gap was that?
um, I think it was roughly 6 months to a year, somewhere in there.
Gotcha.
So those are some pretty rough times. So I don't necessarily remember like the exact amount of time. I would say probably maybe 6 to 9 months,
Gotcha.
somewhere in there.
And
Uh,
at the time, were you married? Did you have a family? Whenever you,
yeah, yeah, I was married and I had I've got my daughter's 21 now. I mean,
okay,
so I had, she was at that time, what, 15, 14, somewhere in there. I forget exactly.
what kind of a toll did this put on your family?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that it was pretty, it was pretty rough. It, I think it was probably I think it was difficult on my daughter because there's just so many changes that were happening. And, it was up and down, but
Mm,
ultimately I feel like, I had a lot of, I think I had support in it, uh, you know, and yeah, it worked out. But,
right.
when you're part of something and then you start to question things and then now you become the outsider. I understand why people don't want to leave the church. It's not easy to all of a sudden go against the masses
Hmm.
and put yourself in that position to be looked at differently. When everything's going great, maybe your life's great, maybe you have a great Bible study group, maybe you have a great men's group, great women's group. I don't know what you have, right? But maybe you have community, you have all these things, and it feels really good, and your life's complete. And guess what? Do you want to be the one that like puts the ripple in the tide? Do you want to be the one that now all of a sudden everyone is like, should we stay away from them because he's
Yeah,
full of the
right.
devil? Well, I'll tell you, it's not comfortable. But I prayed about it and I said, and I remember reading Abraham. You want to talk about somebody that had it bad, and still believed in God no matter what. Look what happened to Abraham.
Yeah.
Abraham said that was told to take his family and leave and go to a land that he didn't know of, that God would show him. So he's just going to uproot everything, leave this world of idolatry the system of idolatry that he lived in. He recognized God for who he is and said, I'm going to listen to what God tells me to do. I'm going to take what I have, my family, and I'm going to leave. And I'm just going to trust that God's taking me to a place where I'm going to be better. And he was tested. How many times was it? 10 to 12
10.
times?
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
it's
when you read through there, none of it was easy. None of
mm-mm.
it. I mean, he went to war. I mean, to the point where
any
he was going to.
modern day Christian at that time would have told him, "See, you shouldn't have left the church because God is cursing you now because of you leaving us." And that's what we get. That's what you and I get, you know. And so,
Well, I I I want to just say this to Christians, and I still talk to a lot of Christians because that's my calling. I believe that,
mm,
and I just want to say that I know that it's difficult, but if you really believe in God, then you have to know that your life's going to be difficult. There's always going to be challenges, but what's on the other side is so much better. And because I've left, and because people like basically have been told to stay away from me because I'm the Antichrist and all these kind of crazy things, there are still people that I know that want to ask me all these questions. They're so interested to hear what I have to
hmm,
say. They want to know why I am where I am, but they're too afraid to ask. They're too afraid to just be. Some people just don't want to know. But I'm telling you, the other side is better. If God has told you to leave and you can see biblical evidence for the way you feel, don't go off your feelings.
hmm,
But if you can see biblical evidence for the way that you're feeling, then you need to pray about it and act out on it
yeah,
regardless of who you lose, what you lose, God could take everything from you, but is the same one that created the things that he gave you is the same one that's creating the things that he's going to give you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just like he did with Job. Same thing. Wow. Man, that was a tough road.
Yeah,
Man.
it only got worse. I mean, I loved those guys that I was with. I mean, the ministry that was there, the men's group and everything that was established. And to this day, I don't have any hard feelings toward them. I
That's good.
recognize that I threaten everything that they believe to be true. And so I don't hate them for it. I'm a little upset. I mean, I'm hurt. I'm a human being.
Yeah,
You
right.
know, it sucks to have to go out on your own and just be against the masses. And that's what happened to me. I ended up sitting, with 13, 14 guys debating things on by myself. Like, that's not comfortable going into a
No,
room
not at
where
all.
that this
Yeah.
debate's going to be everyone against
A
you.
10 against 1. Good Lord. Wow.
It's not comfortable. But look, if what I'm saying is not, like, when I went to Bible college, they didn't teach me the things that I'm saying right now. You might have cursory sweeped over places like Exodus 31 or Deuteronomy chapter 4. You may have been a cursory sweep over places like Ezekiel 18 that talks about if the
Yeah.
wicked man would turn from his sin, that God would forgive him. You do cursory sweeps over things like that. You don't actually study them and believe them without your Christian lenses on,
Yeah, that's right.
so
That's right. Well, man, I got to say, welcome home.
no, I
And
appreciate it.
welcome to the club of the Antichristers.
Hey, it's some hard times, man.
It
It's
is.
it can be
It
some
is.
hard times.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. I really appreciate you sharing your journey. I mean, and just the idea that you went to Bible college and you really pushed to learn to do your best, and you fought through all that and still managed to come out. And and it wasn't, and you saw that yourself before somebody else said, "Hey, ooh, look over here." I mean, you saw it without anybody doing that. You saw the Sabbath day was off, and that provoked you to study even more. And so that's what I want. My heart for people out there, Christians who are watching this, man. Stop taking everybody's word for it, man. Go dig it up for yourself. I mean, study. Don't read the Old Testament. Study the Old Testament. You know what I mean? It's not called the Old Testament, as you mentioned. It's called the Hebrew
Yeah.
Scriptures. Only Christians call it the Old Testament, which is just horrible. So,
So, interestingly, this is like a point that I would really like to drive home if I could, if it's all right with
absolutely,
you.
take it away. Go for it.
So like I said before, I was a street preacher. I would go anywhere and everywhere, and I would just, I would preach. To an unknown number of people. I have no clue how many people that I preached to, witnessed to, whatever you want to call it during that time. I feel like because of that, my life's journey is an attempt to undo some of those things the best that I can, because I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully undo the damage. But I do want to say this. If you can actually dissect the Christian message, the gospel, I want you to recognize how demeaning and damaging it is to a human being, to God's creation. It's demeaning and damning to you as a person. It's denigrating to you as a person, but it's a real slap in the face to the God of creation, the one who created you. When I went to boot camp in 2001, boot camp was broken down into three phases. The very first phase is to basically show you and to teach you that you're no good, that you're worthless, that your whole life you've been brought up to be lazy, and you're just going to die. Every one of you are just going to die, right? And then by the second and third phase, what they do is they start to introduce knowledge and their way of life that builds you to be ultimately the United States Marine. That's what the gospel message does. The gospel message degrades you to the point where you feel your self-esteem is ruined. Everything about you, your self-perception is ruined. And then once you accept the fact that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, that there is none righteous, no, not one, that you want, but you're nothing but filthy rags, you're nothing but a broken vessel. All of these things you've probably heard a million times.
Mm-hmm.
The moment that you hit rock bottom, now it's time to start introducing to you the Christian message. And at that point in time, they can build you back up through their false
The
message.
way they want
And
you to be.
100%.
Yeah.
And you know what? Emotionally, where you just came from, you were at rock bottom. Now I'm accepted, and all of this, it feels really good. The message in itself is extremely damning. If you go back
That's
to
very
places like
interesting.
Genesis chapter 4, and you see what God says to Cain before he kills Abel, he lets him know that he has the capacity to do the right thing. he can improve himself in life, and he can be accepted through the fact that he has improved himself. But if he does not do that, then sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but God says that you can overcome it. Mm-hmm. The concept is, the reason I'm saying all this is because God says very early in the Bible, he says that you can overcome sin. He says that you have the capacity. He's given you the ability to improve where you are in life. Just because you're down. I was a former alcoholic. I was lying in an ICU on my deathbed. I don't know how many times. I'm still here today. My life has, been getting better physically, mentally, emotionally, all of this, not because of the Christian message, but because I've done my best to connect with the God of creation. And through his actual word, the Hebrew scriptures, we can recognize how we should truly have a meaningful relationship with him, regardless of who comes in our life and who leaves. Stand for God. And all of that stuff that you've been taught out of the gospel message that is so demeaning to God's creation, it takes a long time to actually get those feelings and all of those words that have been ingrained in your mind. You have to come out of it, and it takes a while. Mm-hmm. But you have to recognize it's a false message. I preached a false message.
You know what? I couldn't have said that any better. That was very well put and so unbelievably true. I never actually saw the New Testament as an overview like that, but you're absolutely right. It breaks you down and it gets you at such a point that when you finally get accepted, you're so grateful. Like, oh my God, I can never leave this. This is what I've been looking for all my life. So yeah, that's very, very well put, my friend. Well, it sounds like you may be having a YouTube channel specifically for this purpose. Now that's coming out of my lips, not yours, but you said that you definitely feel calling to reach out to people like this. This could be the avenue, this could be the conduit to do it, so.
Well, I appreciate it. I do have a YouTube channel. It's called Out of Edom.
Nice.
And so also, if you want to send me an email, calledoutofedom@gmail.com.
Now, do you interview people also on your channel, or is this stuff you just do to teach, or what?
So I do a little bit of everything. I don't have a ton of videos. Listen, I got a case of ADD. I'm all over the place. I've got to get focused. I have done interviews. I am willing to do more interviews. I'm up to whatever ultimately is going to help people.
That's great. So if you're watching this and you would like to give your testimony either on my show or pepper him, because it would be nice to have more than just one Tanakh talk out there, different Out of Edom. That would be a great avenue also for more testimonies. So we'll try to get people connected with you who this video has touched. And I'm sure it's going to happen because all these videos that are going out for all these testimonials, man, it's changing things. It really is. So
I hope so. I hope people will just recognize that the days that we have coming are so much better than where we've come from. Yeah. Like, everyone will know who the God of creation is. Everyone's going to worship the God of creation. There will be no more idols. There will be no more wars. And I can tell you this, that the idea of not having war anymore, I think people should be excited about that. Yeah, I mean, if you've seen the detriments of what happens during those times of war, and how disgusting a human being can be when they get pushed to the point where they have to do those things. It's not a place where anyone should want to be, and it ruins life. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason why we should have to live this way.
Yep.
He clearly says that the idea in the future is that these things will no longer exist. If that's the case, he's willed it, then why aren't we working toward it?
Yeah, right. I mean, my brother, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure for sure. And thank you all for tuning in. It's very important you guys share these videos with your friends, and then also subscribe to the YouTube channel and turn on all notifications so that you don't miss anything. And once again, reach out to myself or Jeremy if you'd like to share your story. You guys have a great week. Shalom. Take care, everybody.
All right. Take it easy.
Peace. If you enjoyed this channel and the content, and it has changed your life, or perhaps the life of a loved one or a close friend, would you please consider supporting this work? You can click this link and it'll take you directly to my website with the donate button. Or there's a Patreon link and a mailing address for snail mail if you would prefer. If you do donate, please do me a favor and leave me a phone number where I can contact you and thank you properly. I hope you all have a wonderful 2025. Shalom.